ninth session. And there are, I see a few more comments and a few more questions in the chat box. So even if you could also type in your email address in the chat box so that people can get to you if they have any questions. Next, we have Lidia Istrate. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She is a second year PhD candidate at the University of Bucharest, Faculty of Philosophy, with a thesis proposal entitled Alternative Instances of Transcendental Virtues in the Logic-Based Therapy Approach of Philosophical Counseling. In her dissertation, she is keen on suggesting a series of philosophical perspectives that fulfill the role of antidotes for the 11 cardinal errors that may appear in the customer's emotional reasoning. Philosophical counseling has become a major topic of interest since her first year of study at the Faculty of Philosophy, when her current PhD coordinator spoke to her in a discourse on this subject. After graduating with a master's degree in ethics at University of Bucharest, she returned to research on philosophical counseling. Her main topic of interests are philosophical counseling, logic, applied ethic, and research ethics. In addition to her PhD, she is an expert reviewer at the Research Ethics Committee of University of Bucharest. Well, we are eager to hear you, ma'am. Over to you.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all these amazing presentations. I have to start with apologizing if I lose my voice. COVID decided that it's a great time to join the party, and I've tried to conserve all my powers. Let me please share my screen with my presentation. Please confirm if you can see what I'm sharing.
Yes,
Thank you. So today I'm wanting to discuss if modal logic and LBT could be a good match or not. The purpose of my following presentation is to show how a particular case from LBT can receive a better or a good understanding of the natural language in which every reasoning is expressed. I'm sorry, I'm very nervous right now. I'm going to
take your time, ma'am. It's completely all right.
It's such a great moment for me, and I think I'm messing up already. Well, on the other hand, another interest of mine, or another topic of this presentation, is represented by trying to see if a superior logic, like the modal logic, rather than the practical syllogism, can achieve more in understanding the pieces of reasoning that LBT clients usually have. My proposal is that in a particular case, modal logic is able to better capture some expression from the natural language. I am willing to express all these, this is how my presentation is going to be structured. I'm willing to explain all these through a case study as it follows. I thought that it would be better to start from a particular case to explore its subtleties, and after to question if this type of logic, the modal logic, could be, in some cases at least, a useful instrument in the LBT counseling process. Before I start the actual presentation, I want to make a few disclaimers. I think that would be vital. First of all, I'm not a practitioner. I do not, nothing like this. So I do not think that I have, at least not yet, the capacity to understand the complex method and its subterfuges. So what I'm going to do today is to propose a theoretical discussion. And what I am willing is to reproduce the mental process I've been through while trying to understand LBT. So, as I said before, I am starting from a particular case. This is Annie's case, which was presented by Martha Lang in her process of obtaining the LBT certificate for practicing LBT. The case, this case particular, is that one that made me want to do some extra research about this subject, about the practical syllogism or logic in the LBT. So, Martha's case. During the first step of the process, she and her counselor, Martha Lang in this case, worked together for identifying the emotional reasoning. Martha asked her what exactly brought her into therapy and how she was feeling about her life. Annie said that she often felt angry. So Annie has 5 children, and this primarily problematic emotion of her is this one, the anger. So we know that the primarily problematic emotion is anger. Yeah, I'm messing up. Apparently, the source of her anger was that she wanted both her children and herself to always behave and act properly. She wanted full control, yet she admitting that she was unable to fully control her own responsibility at the given time. As a result, her school work sometimes suffered. Martha asked her, the counselor, asked the client what she thought would happen if she could not control every moment in her children's life. She said that it would be chaos, and she did not want chaos in her life. She recounted a story that she could have asked for an extension of a paper without penalty, but chose not to do so because it might have cast her in a negative light. The consequence was a less satisfactory grade. As a result of so much stress and pressure that she put it on herself, and the desire to remain in perfect control, Annie suffers from migraines. So, according to LBT, this emotional reasoning has the following formula, as well known: emotion is equal with the object of emotion and the rating of the emotion. So, as we have seen earlier, her primarily problematic emotion is anger. One object of her emotion is her children not being perfectly controlled all the time. Another object of her is her self-directed. It is not perfect all the time. She is not perfect all the time. So I do not intend to go into the pathological things or the, I don't know, this self-destructive habit that she seems to have. What I'm willing to do is to reform. Martha presented to Annie 2 arguments as it follows. She presented them to Annie, and Annie agreed that these arguments are accurate redemption of her implicit reasoning. The first one, as we can see, the first premise is, if I do not keep myself and my children under perfect control at all time, then there will be anger and chaos. The second premise is that if I do not keep myself and my children under perfect control, I do not keep myself and my children under perfect control all the time. And the conclusion was that therefore there will be, or there already is, chaos and anger. The second piece of reasoning in Annie's problematic reasoning is a disjunctive modus ponent. I must control everything, or there will be chaos and my family will fall apart. The second premise is, it is impossible that I must or can control everything. Conclusion, therefore, there will be chaos and my family will fall apart. Okay. So, next, I am willing to pass by to the practical syllogism and discuss it more theoretical from this particular case. And well, thank you for having me.
Take your time, ma'am. It's completely okay.
No, I'm not I'm not fake one. Okay, I've lost my thoughts. Okay. Well, let me present the practical syllogism and discuss about the practical syllogism in LBT and how I started thinking about this topic of research. Well, according to LBT, the human actions and emotions are primarily deductions from premises. In particular, from our perspective, rule by which we tell ourselves how to act, how to behave, how to feel, how to act in a certain situation, and the report. Aristotle referred to this deduction as practical syllogism. And while I was studying LBT and more specific, the practical syllogism, I tried to see how the practical syllogism used in LBT resembles the practical syllogism that was proposed by Aristotle. In this endeavor, I discovered that the practical syllogism, Aristotelian practical syllogism, has always a purpose. This means that every practical syllogism is constructed to discover the means for achieving a goal. In LBT, for what I know, such a restriction does not exist. Furthermore, I also noticed that in some cases, the practical syllogism is not enough for capturing the precise meaning of the natural language. Firstly, I tried to see how the practical syllogism is constructed in LBT. And I think I should present only the main traits I considered, or I could understand, better said. So the main traits of the practical syllogism in LBT is that any practical syllogism is a deductive reasoning which starts with a general premise and reaches a particular conclusion. Another main trait could be that any practical syllogism presents itself as a piece of reasoning, which means that one reaches a conclusion by inference, not causality. And the last main trait could be that the practical syllogism used in LBT matches the Aristotelian syllogism. Well, to go a bit deeper in this practical syllogism discussion, I want to say that the practical syllogism that is used in LBT uses inferences instead of causality, because LBT presupposes that every piece of reasoning implies an act of volition or decision making. This means that one is able to voluntarily decide whether to believe X or Y without being logically or formally forced to hold any conclusion based on a given set of premises. Basically, this is the difference between the psychological process and the inference and logical implication. Aristotle claimed that every practical syllogism ends in an action. Such an observation has considered odd, to say the least. Most philosophers that study the practical syllogism suggested that any practical syllogism has a conclusion, anything else but an action. So I do not want to enter in this subject. It appears to be a lot of contradictions about it. I will say instead that any practical syllogism could end in an action or a cognitive factor that presents itself at least as necessary ground to act. This will be a given in my presentation or something assumed, since there is not a consensus about it. Well, I was wondering if there is, to turn back to Annie's example, it appears that some expressions are a bit beyond the scope of the practical syllogism. So if we draw a short resume, I understand that the practical syllogism used in LBT is a way of organizing the thoughts of the person. Also, the practical syllogism makes explicit the relation between some emotion and the convictions attached to them. But the main purpose, again, of what I understood of the practical syllogism is not to formalize the natural language so that it may be better to understand. And as we can see, some of the premises I've mentioned before in Annie's argument that were formulated by Martha was, if I do not keep myself and my children under perfect control all the time, or the expression of it is impossible that I can control my children and being in perfect control, such expression are the one that made me think that it's something problematic that there. So how would a practical syllogism approach to this terms, to such terms? I think that this expression could not be ignored because they have a high emotional content attached to them. But in the same time, PS, practical syllogism, cannot formalize it. So, nextly, I am willing to cover some basics in modal logic. In modal logic, such terms as it is impossible, it is easily explained by usage of possible words. For instance, it is impossible means that something will not be true in any possible word. Possible words are mental constructions in which the real world is modified. For instance, there could be a possible world in which I am a human and I do not exist. So, if one tries to use this logic, then it can capture some aspect of the natural language in a better way than it could do so by means in the practical syllogism. So the question I started in this case study is whether the modal logic, so this is the moment when I'm returning to the main point of the presentation, whether this modal logic of first order predicates, the specific, has in practice any advantage over the practical syllogism that is used in LBT. In order to answer this question, I must apply the apparatus of modal logic of first order predicates in the manner in which the practical syllogism was applied in this concrete case. Okay, I'm trying to short it a bit. According to the modal logic of first order predicates, the two forms of practical syllogism that Lang formulated can be rewritten as follows. So this is this one, sorry. I hope it can see. And if there would be to translate this first syllogism into the natural language, we could say that the first premise says, if it is the case that perfect control exists, and this perfect control does not apply to Annie and her children, then Annie will feel anger and chaos. The second premise says that necessarily there is a perfect control, and this perfect control is not applied to Annie and her children. The conclusion shows that necessarily Annie will feel anger and chaos. If there is to move to the second syllogism and to try to translate it into the natural language, we can do it as follows. The first premise says necessarily that either everything is controlled or everything is chaos, and because of the notion of family is impossible. The usage of an exclusive disjunction is useful for reflecting Annie's conviction that she has only two options, and that only one of them can be true. The second premise says that necessarily it is not the case for that everything can be controlled. The conclusion says that the second disjunct is true, meaning that there will be chaos and the family will be consequently destroyed. So, in any case, no, first of all, I am willing to add some theoretical information about this necessity operator. So necessity, we can understand that as it follows. We cannot imagine things that things happening in a different way. So, or something is necessarily only if it is true in all possible worlds. And that is to talk about the possibility. We can imagine things are happening differently, though something is possible only if it is true in at least one possible world. So, at this first step, the advantages of modal logic of first-order predicates comes, first of all, from the power to realign in a strict manner the particularities or nuances of natural language meanings. So, if there is to apply this modal logic in any case, we can find some useful reasons. One can truly understand the strength of expressions like it is impossible or it is necessary. It is clear that those expressions are emotionally loaded and they need to be treated as they appear in the natural language, because, as I said before, this in NSK, it is impossible to control, or I do need to control my children. So this we can see that it has a emotional power that cannot be ignored. Also, one could use the semantics of possible words to better understand how one reaches a certain faulty piece of reasoning. In Annie's case, she reached the conclusion that it will be chaos because she realized that she cannot control everything. The connection between absolute control and order is something which can be exploited by usage of possible words. Okay. And what about other cases? Could the modal logic be a good match in other cases, or is this the only one? Apparently, hopefully not. Modal logic is firstly useful for a better understanding of the natural language. Of course, one could keep the mod exponent or the logical structure of the practice syllogism, but one needs a better instrument to look at the natural language because the natural language is convoluted. What can be used in every case, irrespective if it's traced, is the semantics of possible words. And I'm willing to go to the conclusions because I've messed up everything. One main, basically, conclusion is that with this presentation, I tried to show that modal logic can be better in the understanding the natural language used in any case. I don't know why I've messed Annie's name so many times, for expressing her convictions. Also, I tried to show that modal logic can be useful in every case of LBT by using only the semantics of possible words. And by such consideration, I conclude that modal logic could be a good match for LBT. And I've added some further research. I thought that would be interesting. I was thinking that one could ask, what about some other expressions of the natural language, such as I know that existence is overrated, or I ought to? Can this first order modal logic formalize them? The answer would be no. A reply would be that we can use better logic, but can we entirely formalize the natural language? Again, I guess not. But this does not necessarily be an issue, because the insufficiency of the formal language to captivate the natural language may be considered unavoidable. So the next step in my research would be to study the connection between human reasoning and the power of logic to capture it, with accent, of course, on logic, model logic. So thank you. I'm sorry my head is not here with us today. I hope that was at least something that you could understand. Thank you.
This was truly a very interesting presentation, and I know that you were worried in the beginning that you wouldn't be able to give your best, but frankly, like 2 or 3 minutes in, we didn't even notice it at all. It was really splendid. Now we will begin with the question answer round. Anybody who has a question, please type in question in the chat box, and also we'll reach out, we'll try to cover as many questions as we can. The first question is from Dr. Raja. Dr. Raja, could you please tell us your question?
Thank you, Lydia. I love this. You brought together two things that I love. That's philosophical counseling and modal logic. How can you not love this combination? So beautifully done. I really like it. I do have a question for you. And so what do you think? So, I mean, I think you're spot on, right? That some of these inferences that come up in these cases can be very well modeled or understood in terms of the resources that modal logic provides, right? So I think that's just true. Now I wonder, what is it that what is the gain? What's the gain for the philosophical counselor from realizing this, right? And I think there is really an interesting kind of move that one can make based on what you've said on this sort of realization. Oh, there's modal logic going on. Oh, this person is operating within a frame, right? This person is operating within a frame where certain possible worlds, conceivable worlds, are just not available, right? Are not accessible, right? So the shape of this frame, right? So what you're saying is basically we are becoming aware of the shape of this frame, and that gives us an entry into sort of discussing with the guest, right? Why is it that you think, right, that modal space is actually structured the way that your premise presupposes? So I'm not so sure whether sort of modeling it in terms of modal logic is essential for this, right? I mean, I think you're right? There is modal logic involved, but modeling it and sort of symbolizing it, that would be perhaps a step too far, but sort of pointing to this fact that there is a modal space within which the reasoning of the guest operates, and that's a really interesting fact to draw the patient's or the guest's attention to. I think that's super valuable. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I was trying to understand the entire importance of the comment. Well, I was thinking someday, what if a client comes into therapy, and starts an LBT process, and he suffers not from pathological paranoia, or maybe he has a small fallacy, if I can express like this, and he says something like, I do believe in ghosts, I'm afraid of ghosts. In that moment, I was thinking that maybe it could be useful, this type of logic, because we could translate this problem of believing in ghosts and anything else, like I will try to formulate the example. Necessarily, if I am afraid of ghosts, I will not visit abandoned places. Necessarily, I am afraid of ghosts. So, necessarily, I will not visit abandoned places to respect the modest ponent structure. In this case, I was wondering, would the practical syllogism that is used in LBT be enough for properly formalizing, and understanding this piece of reasoning? I was thinking that no, that one could not avoid the strength of the word necessarily, because it expressed a categorical conviction. Also, one could not use the practical syllogism to formalize the term, because the practical syllogism, of what I understood, does not use the modality. So, another problematic term that made me think more about this problem was this term ghost, that cannot be so easily integrated in a subject-predicate relations that is used in a practical syllogism. The reason for such a hardship would be that any form of syllogism works only with an ontological commitment. This means that the subject of this proposition needs to be real or actual. So I am aware that this aspect is debatable and requires a lot of attention, but I could easily say that one does not need such a theoretical predicament when making a formalization. And this was the point when I was thinking that the counselor could use this form of logic in his counseling process without getting into the hard part of the this theory of this kind of logic. I don't know, hopefully I've made myself clear.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have a question from, just a second, from Antonio Fada. I think it's a comment.
Yeah, I thought about it, but honestly, as we're running a bit of time, I mean, it is something slightly longer. So just give the words to the other, and I will try to reformulate. And eventually, I would like to submit the question directly to Lidia in another case. I mean, it would be something leading us really far, so it's not the case. Just sorry for.
Thank you, sir. So the next question would be from Dr. Cohen.
Thank you, Lidia. I really think the work that you're doing is very important. Formulating constructs of necessity and possibility in a formal way can be useful, I think. Not so much for the client, who will not understand statements like true in all possible worlds. Well, I take that back. I mean, the formalization of it in terms of, you know, how you use the symbolizations in modal logic, you know, the boxes and so forth. I saw you briefly showed it. That could be useful for a philosophical counselor to see how it actually structures out like that. You wouldn't present it to the client like that, but I think the idea of necessity, for instance, the absolutistic must, you know, I must have approval from everybody. That'd be to say that in every possible world, I get approval. But is that even possible? I mean, the refutation of that is on its face. I mean, because you realize that you can't imagine that you're going to get approval by everybody at all times. And that's pretty much to say that it's not true in all possible worlds. So I think what Raja was saying is true. You don't necessarily have to formalize the syllogisms in terms of modal logic to use modal logic, but you could also formalize. But I still see you're using modus ponens, in your inference form, and you picked up on something that really nobody else has ever picked up on before, and that's that the structure of the practical syllogism, in logic-based therapy is not exactly like Aristotle, and it's true. I mean, if you want to stay healthy, then you should eat healthy foods, and that's a means end, connection. But absolute musts are not, means end claims. They're categorical claims too, and so there is a difference between the structure sometimes, not necessarily, but sometimes, of the way I'm using practical syllogism, and also the Aristotle said that the conclusion of a practical syllogism is an action.
Yes.
And essentially what I'm using is, in my talk earlier, I talked about speech acts, performative judgments. The acts in question are really speech acts. They're not necessarily acts that go beyond, the perlocutionary acts, as Earl Searle would say. I'm not talking necessarily about those. I'm talking about speech acts. The evaluative language, that's used in those. I don't think that I'm not sure how you would capture, using modal logic, the emotive meaning of those terms and express the syllogisms in ways that capture the performative dimension, if you're not using something like the practical syllogism. So that is my question to you. I mean, how can you reconcile the performative nature of stuff like catastrophizing and demanding perfection and constipation and so forth? Can you use modal logic to preserve that in your modality of formulating the arguments?
Well, thank you so much for the comment. I didn't mean to be offensive in any way.
No, you weren't. You were very constructive. Don't say that.
I've had a better presentation, but I've told you I cannot think logically if we still talk about logic. Well, I was thinking that this instrument and this possible word, if we're talking about possible word,
Okay.
it could be a useful instrument for the counselor. And it could be easily, I guess, I mean, again, I'm not a practitioner, be explained to the client, and together the counselor and the client could create or try to not to formalize, to create, let me mean to create, to some I will respond to that later in chat. I am not, I do not to be more offensive that I've always already been the kind of presented myself. So no
offense, Lydia. I think what you're doing is important work. I hope you'll communicate it to me.
I've been offensive with the way I've presented myself. And this is okay.
I would disagree with you on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I apologize.
Ma'am, I don't presume to tell you anything, but this was completely out of your control. So there is nothing that you could have done about it. So don't beat yourself up about it. If you're willing, we have quite a lot of questions actually. So the next question is from Carol Gold. Ma'am, would you like?
Oh, yeah. Hi, I had to unmute myself. First of all, I thought your presentation was wonderful. It's a brilliant topic, and I think you captured something really important. First of all, I think that, you know, if we look at the Aristotelian model, Aristotle, I think, would love what you did, because, you know, one of the points of, you know, with thinking about practical reasoning is that he mentions in a couple of places that reasoning about ethics or about behavior, let's say, okay, or choices, is never precise, right? He says that it doesn't have the precision of mathematics. And I think that that's something important to keep in mind. And in a sense, by bringing in these modal operators, you could show the patient or client, whatever, that the mistake they're making is trying to impose operators like it is impossible, it is necessary, and so forth. And once you switch those, you know, to the mode of contingency or possibility, I think it would change the whole picture. You know, it would help the client see very clearly exactly what the reasoning or mistaken reasoning might be. And so I thought, first of all, I think the topic is brilliant. I think it's really, I think it could be very fruitful and very helpful. And also it's just very creative, and your presentation was fine. It was terrific, really. Very rigorous. I liked it.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure which was the question. If you could repeat it. I
was more saying that given, okay, it's partly a question, partly a comment, but do you think that one could use modal logic in the following way? By pointing out to a client that they are operating, that they're thinking within terms of the wrong operators. And instead of it is necessary that, or it is impossible that, it is possible, or it is, you know, likely, et cetera, so that, you know, they don't have the same kind of categorical thinking, because really catastrophizing is, in a sense, using the mode of necessity, right, or impossibility. And so I think that's very good, that could be a very useful tool. And I also think it's a really interesting way to translate the whole point of LBT. If I'm understanding correctly, I'm new to this, so, you know, but that's my impression. And I think that it's very much in tune, and Aristotle certainly, you know, puzzled over modal logic, and he was very interested in the notions of, you know, like in De Interpretatione, he's really struggling with the that whole question of contingency and necessity. So I think that it has great promise, and in a practical way. And I think theoretically it's very helpful, and, you know, just very creative, extremely creative. And I applaud you for it. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We have time for just one question more, and it's being typed in the chat box by Anca. And the question is, should we train clients to use formal logic in action?
In action, if I understood correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
In action as putting it into practice, if there could be used in the process of counseling, or I want to be sure that I understand correctly the question.
Yes, Lydia, I thought that it was very valuable to show the clients what they are doing, how they are using logic. And I was wondering what your opinion was about it. Should we just keep the logic training for the philosophical counselor, or do you think it's possible to work with the clients in a way as to train them into using the logic, maybe not understanding it theoretically per se, or maybe with understanding it, but nevertheless realizing what they're doing and what the logic problems are in how they speak or think?
Thank you so much for the clarification. I'm not sure what I think about this. First of all, because I do not know how the counselor can explain to a client this logic process, or I think the model exponent scheme, if O then P, O, therefore P. This is pretty simple to understand for anyone. But when if we discuss about this in terms of primary operators such as necessity, possibility, or how we can translate the impossible terms such as impossible or possible or never or always, or these categorical terms, I incline to say that it would be too complicated to try to make the client understand this advanced logic. So I would remain to the model exponent scheme, and that would be it. And again, it's an intuition. Like I've said before, I've never been face to face to someone, and I've never had to decide how the process is going to go.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Just one more comment, if I may, in response to what you said. In the practice of critical thinking, I noticed that the Socratic questioning methods tend to be very popular. And sometimes in such questions, they are formulated in such a way that the client realizes something. The way that his ideas are problematized, makes them just realize, oh, there's an error in what I said, or there's a problem with what I said. And I think your work is very important because it trains, first of all, the counselor to use logic, and then the counselor would have to transpose this logic into maybe questioning practice that could also illustrate or show to the client what he's done. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insights and your wonderful presentation. Now we'll be moving on to the second speaker of the 9th session, and that is Anca, ma'am. Anca Tiurean holds an MA in Philosophical Practice and Consultancy, and she has graduated 3 levels of training within the Paris Institute of Philosophical Practice. She has been working as a licensed psychotherapist for 10 years and has been integrating philosophical consultations in her therapy profession since 2017. She works with families, couples, individuals, and small groups. Her MA dissertation has researched the metaphorical load of philosophical consultations in psychotherapy. We are extremely eager to listen to you, ma'am. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I think I should share my presentation first. Okay, and let me know if you can see it.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
All right. Fine. So it is very nice to speak after this diversity of topics that I have seen since yesterday till now. Fallacies, values, sexual ethics, prisons, what else? Philosophical health, a new concept that I hadn't heard before. Addictions, understanding emotions. We had ninja training and the importance of training logic as a competence of people. So this is a really nice intro to my presentation today, which is on the art of confrontation. I think that my presentation is more focused on some considerations about methodology of philosophical practice, and it's inspired by my practice with people. As I use philosophical consultations within the work of psychotherapy, I think I mostly use it as an instrument, as a tool for cognitive training, first of all, because in psychotherapy, even if we want to visit, for example, a traumatic past or psychological ideas that are bound by very strong feelings, we need to, prior to going there, we need to secure that the client is using his best part, which is his reasoning competencies, so that he or she can accompany himself in that remembered past. Otherwise, they would just be re-traumatized by remembering and re-experiencing the whole pain again. So cognitive training is a little bit an intrinsic part of the initial work with clients. And it helps to contain emotions and reactions and to be there for themselves. So the main goal for which we use philosophical practice in psychotherapy is to train the autonomy of the client to think for himself, to be able to become self-aware, and once they become self-aware, not to beat themselves up about what they discover, but rather enjoy it and use it and work with it, and then be more self-responsible, realize their share of contribution in the pain they feel or in the well-being that they can produce for themselves, and to become more open to intimacy. So I started with this quote from the from this man, Ushiba, who is, I think, the first one who proposed the Aikido practice. And he said, there are no contests in the art of peace. Defeat means to defeat the mind of contention that we harbor within. So I really liked this philosophy because it teaches us to start by working with ourselves and to learn to be cooperative with other parts of ourselves, which priorly we have been trying to maybe suppress. And once we are able to encompass and accept all of our humanity, then it becomes increasingly easier to make friends with everybody and to be able to have reasonable conversation, including with people who are who have contrary philosophy to our own. So let's see. I wanted to propose you a brief exercise, so not to just stick into presentation, but to get everyone back to their energy, mental energy working. One of the benefits of philosophical practice in group work is that everyone gets the practice at the same time. If we have a place where to write our thoughts and we've got the chat. And when I work with groups, I usually ask everybody to write down their ideas, whether we get to them or not, if times allow it. And then we together examine the work of each. So this sort of implicitly teaches the people a rule which I think is very important, all of us to be here for each of us. So I propose that you think of your most recent preoccupation, can be philosophical or personal, and that you formulate it as a brief question and put it in the chat box. Okay? And then I'm going to tell you what I mean by digging into the subject. Let me see if, in the meantime, I will check to see if I can also notice the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to maybe need help from someone to read from the chat box, because I cannot see it without the presentation disappearing. So I'm a bit technologically behind.
No problem, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll do it.
So let me know if you see any interesting questions coming up in chat about people's most recent preoccupations, and just read them out loud.
Okay, ma'am. I'm just waiting for comments. I will as soon as I get them.
Okay.
Right. So there is one comment from Akshat. How to deal with someone suffering from an abusive parent?
Okay, thank you.
Will my financial means be sufficient to meet the ends of the month?
Thanks.
Can we harm the dead? How do I move all these different projects forward at the same time?
Okay, great.
So do you want me to go on, ma'am?
Yeah, I think maybe 2 or 3 more, but it would be nice if everybody wrote one, even if we're not going to look at them, because I will show you how you can look at them yourself, and then maybe you will have wanted to do it. So just to read maybe another couple of them.
Okay, ma'am. How can I regain my motivation? How do I secure my mom affordable healthcare?
Can you ask, is there one that doesn't start with how? A why one?
There is a can one.
Okay. So the majority of questions seem to be starting with how. We've got very practical people in the group this evening.
There's also a will, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, a will and a can we. So normally after everybody's written down an important question for them, I think it will become interesting to invite the people to look at their own questions and the structure of their own discourse and start creating assumptions about the author of this question, whether it is them or not. This creates a little bit of distance from oneself and from the idea that was written, and invites the person to study a little bit what assumptions can be made based on only what evidences are present in the structure of that question. So to dig into the subject, in fact, means 2 things. First, we can look at various facets of the topic that the client is interested in. And secondly, we are going to perform something we can call the archaeology of the human subject. We will see the subjective background which led to the creation of each question. For example, the person who writes how to deal with this or how to deal with that, we can make such assumptions like this person has difficulty dealing with that thing that they mentioned, or this person is rather looking for practical advice. They are focused on doing. the person who asks, will my money suffice for the next day? We can say he's more concerned, he's experiencing worry. And of course, he did not mention worry, but the question itself can allow us to infer that he might be experiencing worry. So in this sense, there are two main competencies, I think, that people will train in themselves. One is to self-reflect. Two is to stick to the evidence of their sentence and not write things to which only they have access by knowing themselves and their situation. Yeah, and I think there is also a third one. They will get to work together with the group to examine their own assumptions and to see if their assumptions are in fact based on the evidence of their question, or if their assumptions are rather maybe over-interpretations or relying on information that is not visible or not common sense. Okay, so let's see. I mentioned in the title of this slide that an art is developed through practice. So the reason we get everybody to do the work is because we want everybody to practice all the time. We don't like it to happen like in school, where one is asked and everybody else relaxes because it's not their turn. We want everybody to do the work, and then we just focus on part of what the group wealth of ideas brought up. Okay, so that is supposed to mean that a person is going to be training in the consultation, then they could be training in the breaks, you know, after the consultation. They could be training at home because they can do this to other people, what has been done to them. And then little by little, as Hadot said, hopefully this turns into a way of life, the self-questioning and evidence-based thinking and so on. So going to the next slide, I was thinking to maybe explain the picture a little bit, and because I saw that there are these two martial artists, and in a previous presentation, I think someone wrote about ninja training, and I thought, what a nice coincidence. I see philosophical practice as a kind of mental gymnastic, or the training of a kind of mental gymnastic, where you train your skill to think, like my colleague Lidia said before, to become more capable of using logic rather than the type of thinking that is rather emotionally reactive. But like in martial arts, we as well train our character, our strength, and our awareness of limits, our limits and the limits of our environment. So here is a small description of how to change habits. I think this is a very popular scheme. We go from being incompetent and not knowing it. For example, the person who makes a catastrophization and she doesn't know what she's doing, she's just the victim of her own thought. So that is a moment of unconscious incompetence. They just suffer, but they don't know why. Then we move to conscious incompetence, becoming aware of what you can't do or how your own discourse shapes the type of suffering that you have to deal with in your life. And this is a bit of an ouch, because people generally don't like to see their own incompetence. They feel ashamed, they think they should perform, etc. But they can get used to it once they realize that basically our incompetence is part of our limits, and our limits are part of our human existence. Our limits are places of contact with the world and with the others. So they learn to accept them. As soon as they realize their limits and lack of capacities, they can start to train their skills in a conscious way and become increasingly more competent, for example, in spotting a fallacy, or in conceptualization, or in problematizing an idea, etc. And the more they do it, the more they get used to this type of being in the world. So their competence can become unconscious and automatic. And then they've got philosophy as a way of life. Okay, so I would like to provide the group with a new brief task. Get ready, everyone. I want you to write down which competencies are trained by philosophical practice, in your opinion. So if you could just provide names of competencies that you think are trained by practicing philosophy, put them in chat, and my colleague Mihika is going to read a few, if you please.
Yes, ma'am, we have already got comments. Empathy is one word.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Go
waiting.
on. Just, yeah, okay. People need to think, no rush. Thinking
Reasoning clearly.
What was that?
Sorry, reasoning clearly.
Okay, clarity.
Acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Listening.
Mm-hmm.
We're still waiting for more comments, ma'am. Self-reflection.
Okay. I would suggest you let yourselves inspired by our colleague Lydia's work from before, and think in terms of logic competencies. What could be trained through philosophical practice?
We have a couple more comments, ma'am. Ability and disposition to examine one's own positions critically is one comment. The second is out-of-box thinking.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So once you think about these type of competencies, you are, I think, describing a little bit about your worldview regarding what philosophical practice is or should be. For me, this type of practice has been most important in the area of logic. When I went in my first semester of philosophical practice master course, I got a very low grade in logic, and I was shocked. I said to my professor, I thought I was smart and you just proved me stupid. How is this possible? I was very embarrassed about my grade. But it turns out that I was making important logic mistakes, and I didn't even know how to assess that they were mistakes. Like, I was giving too many details and nothing essential, or I was projecting my own point of view onto a text and thinking that it was the author who suggested something, but instead it was me who placed it there. And things like that, you know. So some of the competencies that were important for me were conceptualization and the ability to express myself clearly, to choose the best words for what I mean to express, problematization of ideas, which means basically showing what problem an idea engenders. For example, that it doesn't apply everywhere, or that in certain circumstances, the opposite of it is true, and so on. Okay, so then there is this other question for the group. What do you think confrontation means in terms of philosophical practice? Do you think that in philosophical consultations, there is confrontation? Allow yourself to just consider what this word means for you, and maybe write down in chat or somewhere else, what is confrontation? How do people confront, and what do people confront in these consultations, or why? See if just you can come up with a few ideas or keywords that you have about the role of confrontation in philosophical practice?
We have one comment. It's a Socratic. I'm so sorry. Sir, Aaron, sir, I don't know how to say the second word, but it's Elenchus.
Elenchus.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
It's a Greek term. Don't worry. I don't know it either, but it's okay.
Is what really comes to mind is what he says. One is confronted with one's own perspective and perhaps its limit. Socratic meditation allows for examination. I think about the critical assessment of thoughts and emotions, the self, from Dora Ann. And that's it. Oh,
nice.
wait, there is.
Okay, go on.
The difficulty of aligning actions with thoughts and values.
Okay, yeah. Which brings to mind also something interesting called the performative contradictions. When people say something, but what they perform is the opposite or something else. This is one of the most difficult things to face in ourselves, that we contradict ourselves. And I think that the other difficult thing to face in ourselves is all those characteristics which are loaded with negative connotations, such as that I'm a greedy person, or that I'm lazy, or that I'm violent. Everything we don't want to view ourselves as, when it comes up as visible in our discourse momentarily, I think we rather not look there. It's painful to see that we are not perfect, that we have everything that human beings are capable of. But it's very interesting and liberating to be able to accept those parts of ourselves. So I want to just share a few of the outcomes of working in philosophical practice with people. These outcomes are based on verbal feedback from the participants and on their attitude feedback, so to speak, their performative feedback. That is how their behavior changed from the beginning when we first met, after a while of working together. Here, I would like you to just look at this list of outcomes. I tried to conceptualize them as easily and as clearly as possible. And if you need me to answer your questions about what they mean, feel free to raise your hand and to ask me. If not, I will just go through them, just read them and move on. So I noticed people started to enjoy conflict more. They started to be more collaborative with each other. They were enjoying the novelty of perspectives, learned to get out of their own paradigm and view things from a different point of view. They became less defensive. Their mind started to view more options for their problems, so their mind gained some mobility. There was an increase in intimacy among people, especially when they realized that they shared a lot in common in terms of pains, problems, mistakes, etc., everything human. Their capacity to have a reasonable talk increased rather than just fighting with each other and trying to seem what they want to seem. Their abilities to conceptualize was as well more visible because they were increasingly able to choose their words in accordance to what they meant to say. So there was less and less discrepancy between what they meant and what they actually said, because they started to check their own discourse and clarify it. They were also better at listening because they received a lot of tasks to paraphrase what their interlocutor said, and also an increased habit of reality checking, because they got a lot of questions like, how do you know that? Can you point to something in the text that shows it's like this, etc. Okay. And moving on, I also saw some, yes, please.
I am sorry to interrupt you,
No
but
problem.
you have 20 minutes left. So to enable the question answer round, it would be better if you could speed up if you can.
Okay. Maybe we can combine questions and answers with the last of the presentation. There's not much left. I just saw some variety of reactions to philosophical consultations. Some people experienced it as therapy. For others, it was hell. For others, it was playful, and others enjoyed it, etc. And these are just a few of the recommendations or good practices that I managed to put together when considering what does the art of confrontation in philosophical practice consist of. I think it's important that we facilitate client thinking, that we don't work for them, that we let the client formulate and then check what himself what he's written, that we examine evidence together, that we use common sense, that we notice emotional obstacles to thinking and try to at least remove them or work in spite of them, because this is one of the most important competencies for people to be able to hold their mind together and capacity to think under intense emotional experience. Making use of play and irony, being able to wonder with the client instead of looking smart and giving them smart ideas, because otherwise they will be made to feel stupid. And there is a great deal of improvisation due to questioning, which follows the client responses. So we cannot have a long-lasting strategy. Okay, let me see just if this is a small list of difficulties, which I conceptualize why people have a hard time usually in philosophical consultations where they have to self-reflect, is that they are preoccupied with their survival. They become very attached to their ideas. So once an idea is attacked, they feel attacked themselves. They are preoccupied with reproduction, and I don't mean this in a sexual sense necessarily, but more in a symbolic sense. They want other people to take their ideas and have the same ideas like me, or so. So to be understood and to spread their own ideas to others as well. There are resistances because they experience the other as a threat and different ideas as a threat to their own. They're afraid of shame and humiliation once they are seen. This image of who they are is a construct to which they cling, so it's really hard to have it challenged. I mean, to discover that you're not who you thought you were, or not only that. Then a lot of the questioning that is performed on people's beliefs, which are anxiolytics, usually relieve them of anxiety, will lead to an increase of anxiety. So they're going to do a lot of strange things in defense of their beliefs. Then there's this neurological reactivity someone spoke about. When they're under stress, they are less likely to be able to think because of the cortisol that says, don't think, run, there's danger happening. There's the common fear of mistaking, ambition, power struggles in the relationship with the counselor, and sometimes self-sabotage. Yeah. Okay, I will probably, I will leave this list on for you as I take your questions. I wanted to make it a discussion actually, but I realized we might not have time. I wanted to ask you to formulate your questions for me and write them in the chat box. And then I was thinking I'm going to ask you to examine your own question and make assumptions about the author based on them. But I don't think we will have time. So this is just to show you how I normally would work with the group. And yeah, I'm going to be open now to your inquiries. So here is what I propose though. Write a brief form of your question for me if possible. And I will respond.
Okay, so the question answer round begins. And those of who have a question, as Nan said, you could write the question in the chat box, or you could type in question, and then you could speak it out. Ivan, so you raised your hand.
Thank you very much for the Anca for the wonderful presentation. And so trying to get a sense of, the kind of the conception of philosophical counseling that you are using. But I mean, so you mentioned several things like, it usually plays a role in the initial stages of a much perhaps longer process where you basically, teaching people how to think critically, there's cognitive training, with the aim of self-awareness and autonomy, use of knowledge constructively, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, and so teaching people how to formulate questions, how to express themselves, how to question the assumptions within those questions and other things. Couple, it's a question that has two parts to it. First, I mean, how long usually that takes, how long usually that takes within the philosophical counsels, how much time you spend with a client, engaging in this kind of cognitive training before you move on to some other, address some other issue. Now that you think they're ready to think critically about their own condition, that's one thing. That's one part of the question. The other part, if you can answer, is sort of like, seems to me that your conception of philosophical counseling is mostly like, kind of like the philosophical, what is philosophical about your philosophical counseling is sort of like critical thinking for the most part, right? I mean, but, there is a Socratic dimension to it in the sense, questioning very broadly your own assumptions. But somebody might say to you, well, I mean, critical thinking is not unique to philosophy. It's sort of, it's not, it's also, the sciences, the social sciences, cognitive behavioral therapy uses critical thinking as well, right? I mean, and so, and so I guess, it's not enough to call it philosophical to just, use critical thinking to help people improve their critical thinking skills. That there gotta be other components, like, for example, in the case of logic-based therapy, there's a strong emphasis on virtue theory, and, there's also a strong emphasis on, discussing uplifting philosophies and trying to help people understand uplifting philosophies. And then that creates a space, at least for me, to really philosophize with people about the meaning of those uplifting philosophies, right? So space to philosophize. So it's not just critical thinking. Of course, logic-based therapy is about, refuting the irrational thinking, representing logically, and perhaps even modeling now, I mean, so I guess, can you answer those two parts, the questions if possible, right? I mean,
yes.
If we're not taking too much time.
Thank you, Ivan. So let me just first check if these are your two questions. How long cognitive training takes and how is this practice philosophical? Did I resume them fine?
That's perfect. Two parts.
Okay. Yeah, when I work in the context of psychotherapy is different than when I work in strictly philosophical counseling. And sometimes I separate them and sometimes not. When I work in a contract of psychotherapy, the cognitive training happens all the time, but not in a pedagogical way. It is in the way that I question people. For example, I ask them stuff about what evidence they have to claim what they claim. And when they say, well, it's because they looked at me in a funny way, I can ask things like, well, if we ask them what they meant, do you think they might say something else? Or could it mean something different as well? Or what makes you to think that it's likely what you think and not something else? So it's in the way of questioning them that I do this training. That's why it's very applied and not theoretical. And this cognitive work takes place most of the time, except when we work on very deep emotions, like when the person tells something of their life story, which is very painful, then I don't go reasoning with them. Then I just get silent and I stay with them. And we just contemplate I was going to say the beauty of their problem and the beauty of their pain, but maybe that's a bit paradoxical to say. But we just sort of contemplate it and make room for finally, their expression of what they've been meaning to say. And I think it's very important by then for them to be able to use the words that allow them to self-express best, rather than just go around forever and not say it. And how this then in philosophical situations, in philosophical practice, the cognitive training is it's the base. So I don't let people tell their personal stories. We just work with ideas. And once a person said an idea, it doesn't belong to the person anymore. It belongs to the group, and the group starts to value it, to work with it. So yeah, I think the answer is it takes forever. The cognitive training, it takes forever. Now, in which sense it is philosophical? It's because it's not pedagogical. So we will not go S is P kind of formulas. We work with the ideas of people in a dialectical manner, and every idea is interesting. We look at it in depth. We see how it connects to other ideas. We remember philosophers who had similar ideas and which philosophers contradicted those philosophers and how. So people also can place their mind, themselves, and their worldview in an overall map of philosophical thought and become interested in what they have in common with, I don't know, Nietzsche or Augustine or whoever it is that they reminded of.
Okay, so you do bring philosophies and philosophers into it, right? So it's not just critical thinking and some very broad conception of Socratic dialectic, right? I mean, it's okay. So I just wanted to clarify.
I must mention it's to the extent that I know philosophy is not my basic training. I was trained in psychotherapy first, and there's so much history of philosophical thought which I haven't read. I only know major thinkers but usually other people from the group, they are more experienced in philosophy, and sometimes I learn from them. I just use my pen and say, what's the name of this guy again? Nagarjuna, I have to check him out, never heard. So I study together with the people, the philosophy, which is very nice. Thank you, Ivan.
There is a question from Akshat Kapoor. Akshat?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your presentation. I love the slides as well. They were very informative. My question is, so how is philosophical consultancy in groups? What is the skill set when you're dealing with philosophy in groups, as opposed to when you're dealing it on an individual basis? Is there a different skill set on the part of the counselor and the moderator?
Okay. Yeah, I think it changed my work a lot. Actually, the reason why I pursued this master was because as a therapist in the past, I had very much difficulty with confronting clients. I didn't want to be mean. I didn't want to upset them, and people would just get immediately upset about anything. They just wanted to talk and to tell their story repetitively, and nothing was changing, and they were just complaining. And I was thinking, I have to do something, but everything upsets people. So how do I confront what's going on? And so once I got into the training as a philosophical practitioner, everything became much, much easier. For example, one very important thing that I address in family consultations is that I tell them, you don't need to agree with each other. You can have conflicts. You can be in opposition if you like, but you have to understand each other before you object to each other. Because people, they were objecting to small part of the other person's discourse, not grasping the essence. And it was chaos. Before philosophical practice, the way I handled this chaos was that I was trying hard to get them to slow down, to shut up, to speak one at a time. It was like a kindergarten sometimes, you know, and I thought family therapy is impossible because everybody just speaks one over another, or sliding the meaning of words into whichever directions they liked. So now it became much more orderly. So when somebody gives an objection, I'm asking them, what idea is it that you object to? To what she said. Well, what did she say? Can you repeat it in your own words? Then they repeat it, and then I say, let's check if it's the same thing she said. No, it's not the same. So then they cannot make their objection. So we've become a lot more orderly and facilitated how people understand each other.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a very interesting insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
So ma'am, we have about 2 minutes left, and there is one question in the chat box. So
okay.
I'm going to read it out. Yeah. So the question is, has philosophical counseling altered your approach to how you work as a systematic psychotherapist, and how?
Oh, I think I just responded to that one. Sorry,
yes.
I combined in my head Akshat question with Raja's question. So I have to check again first if Akshat, did I respond to your question or not?
Yes, I just wanted to, basically my question was just, is there a different skill set when you're dealing with groups and when you're dealing individually? So yeah, that was a very good insight, and I didn't get a lot from that.
So the part which I missed in your question was if there is a difference in skill set when working individually or with families. I would mention something else here, since now I got your question better. I would say that with individual work, I place more emphasis on self-consultation. Self-consultation is where I invite the person to work with the products of their own mind. So if they tell me an idea, I facilitate them thinking about that idea and problematizing their own idea and questioning themselves. Whereas in family therapy or couple therapy, there are interlocutors. So it doesn't happen all in the head of the person, it happens among people. Yeah, that's the main difference, I think. So thank you everyone for the questions and for your patience, and looking forward to hear what the next ones have to say. By the way, if you want to address more questions to me, you can write me in this address. I'll give you my Yahoo email address, and I will gladly take more of your questions and continue the discussions.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really interesting listening to your anecdotes and the way you handle therapy. So thank you. Now we'll be moving on to the 10th session, but that session will be chaired by Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam, could you please take over?
Yes, I will. Mahika, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job today, and we really appreciate your work and helping us out.
Thank you, sir.